The sound of fists pounding against wood was the first thing that brought me back to reality. It was a rhythmic, hollow thud, followed by the heavy scent of fresh pine, artificial lilies, and a chorus of highly theatrical weeping. My head throbbed as if someone had violently crammed an entire trashy romance novel straight into my skull. Oh, poor Chloe. A female voice sniffled outside. May her soul rest in peace. If only she hadn't been so foolishly obsessed with the wrong brother. Rest in peace? Whose peace? Certainly not mine. I opened my eyes, but there was only pitch-black darkness. My arms were pinned tight against my sides in a suffocatingly narrow space. The memories that didn't belong to me rushed into my brain like a tidal wave. Chloe Vance, eldest daughter-in-law of the prestigious Vance family, legal wife of the brilliant, wealthy, and notoriously cold Julian Vance, and, unfortunately, the tragic, brainless antagonist of the melodrama I had been reading right before I fell asleep. The original Chloe had it all: a gorgeous husband, endless wealth, and high social standing. Yet, she had chosen to throw it all away by desperately chasing her brother-in-law. Continuous playboy Christian Vance. The more Christian humiliated her, the harder she pursued him. The more he publicly flirted with other women, the more she lost her mind. Her fixation had ultimately pushed her over the edge. After Christian publicly mocked her at a high society charity gala, the original Chloe took an overdose of sleeping pills. In the novel, her tragic end was met with cold indifference. Christian had simply shrugged and said, "She did it to herself. It's her own fault." Remembering that line filled me with such a visceral rage that I wanted to tear the roof off. Wait, I stretched my hands upward. Smooth, polished wood met my fingertips. I was actually lying inside a casket. Outside, a lazy, arrogant male voice cut through the weeping. "Are you guys done crying yet? She took a few pills just to get my attention. And you all turn it into a full-scale funeral. Who are we trying to impress with this circus?" That voice? Christian Vance, the self-absorbed, arrogant prince of the nightlife, had officially arrived. I braced my hands against the heavy lid of the casket, channeled every ounce of strength I had, and shoved upward with a fierce, desperate heave. With a loud, echoing crash, the heavy wood slammed to the floor. The crying outside stopped instantly. Blinding white light rushed into the small space, making my eyes sting sharply. I sat straight up in the middle of the casket. My hair was a wild, tangled mess, and my throat felt like sandpaper. But the fury burning in my chest was enough to set the entire funeral home on fire. The staff standing around the viewing area scrambled backward in terror. A young receptionist screamed, pointing a trembling finger. "She's alive. Mrs. Vance is alive." I gripped the edge of the velvet lining and swung my legs over the side. The moment my feet hit the floor, my knees buckled slightly. The residual drugs were still slowing down this body. But physical weakness didn't matter. I still had more than enough strength to swing my arm. Christian stood a few paces away, wearing a crisp black designer shirt, a diamond stud in his ear, and a smirk that screamed privileged bad boy. He frowned, looking at me with utter annoyance. "Chloe, seriously. Are you done with the theatrics, faking your own death just to scare me? Did you honestly think this would make me feel guilty?" Even if you actually slap, the entire room fell into a dead, suffocating silence. Christian's head snapped to the side, his diamond earring catching the light as his arrogant smirk shattered into pieces. My palm stung sharply, but the rush of adrenaline was pure bliss. "What did you just call me?" I asked, my voice dangerously low. Christian clutched his reddening cheek, staring at me in absolute disbelief. You dared to strike me, and I'll do it again," I replied, raising my hand slightly. He instinctively took half a step back. Good, he still knew how to feel fear. I looked him dead in the eye, pronouncing every syllable with chilling clarity. "I am your older brother's wife, by blood and by law. You address me as your sister-in-law. Who raised you to be so incredibly disrespectful that you call me by my first name?" Christian's face flushed a deep, angry crimson. "Are you kidding me? You used to follow me around like a lost puppy. Who are you trying to fool with this sudden, dignified act?" The surrounding staff lowered their heads, none of them daring to breathe loudly. Right at that moment, the sharp, authoritative click of stiletto heels echoed from the grand entrance of the hall. A woman stepped into the room wearing a tailored teal designer suit, her hair perfectly coiffed, a pristine strand of South Sea pearls draped around her neck. Her aura was so sharp and commanding that the staff immediately shrank back. My mother-in-law, Madeline Vance. In the original book, she was the epitome of the harsh, unyielding matriarch. Because she despised the original Chloe's desperate behavior, she had made her life a living hell. The original Chloe had been crushed under the weight of her mother-in-law's disdain and her brother-in-law's cruelty. Given that I had just slapped her youngest, favorite son, I knew this wasn't going to be an easy encounter. Seeing his savior, Christian immediately pointed a finger at me. Mom, look at her. She just woke up from her little stunt and attacked me. She's completely lost her mind. Madeline Vance looked at the red handprint burning on her son's cheek, then shifted her gaze slowly toward me. Her expression was strange. It wasn't anger, and it certainly wasn't disgust. She walked over until she was standing directly in front of me. The faint, expensive scent of sandalwood and lavender radiating from her made my spine stiffen. You hit him, she stated plainly. I held her gaze and nodded. Yes, I did. Christian immediately chimed in. You hear that? Mom, she's not even denying it. Madeline didn't even glance at him. She kept her eyes locked on me. Why, I brushed a stray lock of hair away from my face. My voice still slightly raspy, but clear enough to echo through the room. Because he stood beside my casket and claimed I faked my own death just to win his attention. Because he refuses to show me the basic respect a sister-in-law deserves. And because his sheer lack of shame is an embarrassment to the Vance name. Madeline's perfectly sculpted eyebrows raised slightly. Christian let out a bitter, mocking laugh. Sister-in-law Chloe, you were obsessed with me. Everyone in this city knows it. Are you really going to play the devoted wife to my brother now? I looked him up and down with pure disgust. People lose their minds sometimes. Christian, fortunately for me, staring into the abyss gave me total clarity. My vision is perfectly fine now. His face darkened. I stepped closer to him. Before today, I was foolish enough to waste my time on you. But looking at you now, what do you actually bring to the table besides a passable face? You don't handle a single corporate account. You contribute absolutely nothing to this family. And you spend your mother's money like water while expecting every woman in the world to worship the ground you walk on. You aren't a catch. Christian, you are the absolute worst return on investment this family has ever seen. A young maid in the corner let out a muffled gasp and instantly buried her face in her hands to hide her reaction. Christian's hands began to shake with pure rage. You psycho sister-in-law? I corrected smoothly, offering him a sweet, venomous smile. Address me incorrectly one more time, and you get another slap. Consider it a cleansing ritual for my soul. Christian choked on his own words, entirely speechless. Suddenly, a soft chuckle broke the silence. The laugh was quiet, but in the stillness of the room, it caused everyone to freeze. Madeline Vance stepped forward and took my hand in hers. I braced myself, expecting a reprimand, but she simply turned my palm upward, inspecting the skin that had reddened from the force of the slap. Does your hand hurt? She asked gently. I blinked. This wasn't in the script. Christian was just as stunned. Mom, what are you doing? She hit me. Madeline turned a cold, piercing glare toward her youngest son, a grown man, needing his sister-in-law to teach him basic manners in the middle of a viewing room. And you have the nerve to feel wronged. You are my son. Christian, which only makes your behavior a public embarrassment to me. Christian looked as if he had been physically choked, standing frozen in place. Madeline turned to the funeral directors. Clear all of this morbid junk out of here. My daughter-in-law is alive. This circus is over. The staff immediately scrambled to obey her orders. I watched her closely, an uneasy feeling settling in my chest. In the original novel, Madeline Vance blindly adored her youngest son and detested Chloe. But the woman standing before me was sharp, calculating, and acted as though she had been waiting for this exact moment for an eternity. She led me over to a velvet armchair, sitting me down before pouring a glass of warm water from a nearby dispenser and handing it to me. Drink this. Your body is still recovering. I took the glass, testing the waters carefully. You're not angry with me for hitting Christian. Mom Madeline stared at me for a very long time, deep within her eyes. I saw a profound, heavy exhaustion, the kind of look worn by someone who had already lived through a lifetime of tragedy and ash. In the past, I blamed the wrong people for far too many things. My fingers tightened around the glass. She leaned in closer, lowering her voice so that only I could hear her words. Chloe, if I told you that I have already lived this life once and died a terrible death, would you believe me? My heart stopped for a fraction of a second. Before I could process her words, the heavy double doors of the hall swung open with a commanding thud. A man in a perfectly tailored charcoal gray suit stepped into the room. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a striking, aristocratic face that remained utterly unreadable. But the moment his dark eyes locked onto mine, they held a depth that felt more intense than the night sky outside. Julian Vance, my legal husband, he stopped directly in front of my chair. His gaze swept over the discarded casket being wheeled away, before settling on my slightly trembling hands. Are you hurt? With that single question, the entire room fell dead silent again. Clutching the warm glass of water, I couldn't help but marvel at the sheer absurdity of my situation. I had woken up in a casket, slapped my arrogant brother-in-law, discovered my mother-in-law was a time-traveling, reincarnated soul, and realized my cold, distant husband was so breathtakingly handsome he put every Hollywood actor to shame. If fate was going to force me into this dramatic story, fine. From this day forward, Chloe Vance was no longer going to be the pathetic, disposable woman who died over a worthless playboy. I looked up at Julian, intentionally softening my voice so everyone in the room could hear. Julian. I was so incredibly scared. Christian's eyes widened as if he had just swallowed a stone. Madeline took a slow sip of her water, the corner of her lips twitching upward into a tiny, hidden smile. Julian remained silent for 2 long seconds. Then, slowly, he reached out and placed a firm, reassuring hand on my shoulder. Don't be scared. I'm here. Perfect. This powerful, wealthy man was the ultimate shield, and I was going to hold on to him with everything I had. The moment Julian spoke those words, the room became so quiet you could hear the faint rustle of the curtains being drawn by the staff. I leaned slightly into his touch, playing the part of a fragile, delicate flower that had barely survived a brush with death, while mentally calculating my next 10 moves. Christian stared at us like he was seeing a ghost. Julian, don't let her fool you. You know exactly what kind of embarrassing stunts she used to pull to get my attention. She wakes up and suddenly she's calling you her loving husband. She's acting. Julian, it's a total lie. Julian didn't immediately fire back. He simply kept his dark eyes fixed on me, his gaze deep and inscrutable. It was impossible to tell whether he believed me or not. But the hand resting on my shoulder remained steady, warm, and grounded. He didn't pull away, and he didn't push me off. That was all the confirmation I needed. I let out a soft, delicate cough, making my voice sound even sweeter. I admit I was foolish in the past. Julian, I let a total lack of judgment blind me, but lying inside that dark casket made me realize what truly matters. The person I should have been treasuring all along is my husband. Madeline had to look away to hide her amusement, while Christian looked like he was about to explode. Who are you calling a lack of judgment? I looked him dead in the eye. Wow. You recognized yourself remarkably fast. A maid nearby accidentally dropped a handful of white floral arrangements she was clearing away. She hurriedly knelt to pick them up, her shoulders shaking violently as she desperately tried to suppress her laughter. Christian's face burned a dark, furious purple. Mom, are you seriously going to sit there and listen to her talk to me like this? Madeline set her glass down with a deliberate click. I am listening. And frankly, she makes an excellent point. She looked up, her voice quiet but sharp enough to send a chill down anyone's spine. How much longer do you intend to make a scene? Christian, your sister-in-law just returned from the brink of death, and her health is incredibly fragile. Instead of showing an ounce of family decency, you open your mouth only to hurl accusations. Did I raise you to be a public embarrassment? Christian froze. It was clearly the first time in his life that Madeline had reprimanded him so harshly in front of the household staff. In the original, Chloe's memory, he was the spoiled, untouchable, youngest son who got every luxury, every dollar, and had his mother clean up every single one of his messes. Now, his safety net had been violently ripped away. The sting must have been agonizing. I took a slow sip of water, hiding my grin behind the rim of the glass. Julian gently guided me over to a nearby leather sofa. He unbuttoned his suit jacket and draped it over my shoulders in one smooth, natural motion. The family doctor is on his way. Stop talking so much. Save your energy. His words weren't overly affectionate, but they weren't cold either. It was the perfect, graceful exit from the conflict. And I nodded obediently. Okay, I'll listen to you. Christian's expression grew even uglier watching the display. Chloe, you've really shifted your targets. Haven't you? I let out a long, dramatic sigh. Christian, that remark lacks any shred of intellect. Julian and I are legally married. Treasuring my husband is called growth, not shifting targets. And I will remind you one last time, address me as your sister-in-law. Christian clenched his fists so hard his knuckles turned white. Madeline added coldly from her chair. Starting today. Christian, if I hear you address your sister-in-law by her first name again, your monthly allowance will be cut in half. Christian gasped. Mom, are you seriously threatening me with money? Madeline adjusted the elegant platinum watch on her wrist. No. Christian, I am teaching you manners. The entire dynamic in the room had shifted completely. I looked at Madeline, fully convinced now that she hadn't just undergone a simple change of heart. The woman sitting across from me acted as though she knew exactly how things would end, aiming every single blow perfectly at Christian's weakest points. Julian also lingered his gaze on his mother a beat longer than usual. He was brilliant. He had undoubtedly noticed the sudden change in her behavior as well. The family doctor arrived a few minutes later. After a thorough examination, he concluded that my vitals were stable but my body was severely weakened, emphasizing that I needed absolute rest and zero emotional stress. I nodded solemnly, then cast a pointed look toward Christian. Did you hear the doctor? No emotional stress. Christian ground his teeth so hard I could hear it. You piece of Madeline shot him a freezing glare. Christian choked back his insult, his chest heaving before he finally forced out 3 bitter words. Sister-in-law. Hearing that felt so satisfying, I felt like I could eat a 3-course meal. The staff finished clearing out the funeral arrangements, replacing the somber white lilies with vibrant, elegant orchids. The room that had felt suffocatingly bleak just an hour ago suddenly felt alive and warm. Madeline ordered the staff to escort Christian out of the room. He clearly wanted to protest, but under his mother's icy gaze, he had no choice but to storm out. Before he crossed the threshold, he turned back to shoot me one last venomous glare. I simply smiled, silently mouthing the words, "Drive safe, Christian." He grew so infuriated he nearly tripped over the doorstep. Once the doors closed, only Madeline, Julian, and I remained. The tension in the room thickened. Julian sat on the sofa opposite me, his long, elegant fingers resting casually on the armrest. You've truly had a change of heart. His voice was calm, but the question carried immense weight. It was a trap. Saying too much would expose me as an imposter, but saying too little wouldn't be convincing enough to a man as sharp as him. I lowered my eyes to the glass in my hands. When I was lying inside that casket, surrounded by total darkness, I realized that no one outside actually cared about me. It made me see how incredibly stupid it is to throw your life away for someone who doesn't value you. Julian remained silent, watching me intensely. In the past, I embarrassed you, and I caused Mom nothing but grief. I continued, my voice dropping to a soft murmur. I intend to change that. Madeline suddenly reached out and squeezed my hand. Her palms were slightly cold. Chloe, stop blaming yourself. You aren't the only one in this family who needs to change. I looked up, seeing a complex, heavy wave of emotion in her eyes, profound regret, deep sorrow, and the fierce determination of a woman who had once lost everything. Julian's brow furrowed slightly at his mother's tone. Madeline turned her gaze to him. Julian, give us a moment. I want to speak with Chloe alone. Julian looked at me, and I gave him a reassuring nod. He stood up, pausing briefly to instruct a passing maid to bring in some hot soup before he exited the room. The moment the heavy doors closed behind him, Madeline let out a long, heavy breath. She looked straight at me, completely dropping her polished facade. "You're not the original Chloe, are you?" And the water in my glass sloshed against the rim. But Madeline didn't pressure me to answer. She turned her gaze toward the grand French doors leading to the courtyard, watching the staff finish removing the last remnants of the funeral equipment. "In my past life, you actually died today," she said, her voice dropping to a rough, emotional whisper. Christian didn't feel a single shred of remorse. "My husband, Charles, blamed you for bringing shame upon the Vance name. Julian buried you in silence. And after that day, he became entirely consumed by a dark, unreachable coldness. A chill ran down my spine. She really was a reincarnated soul." Later on, Madeline continued, her eyes growing distant. "Christian was swindled out of every dime he owned by a con artist, dragging the entire Vance group into a massive financial scandal. Charles stabbed me in the back, betraying the family for a sweet, manipulative woman named Evelyn. Julian tried to carry the weight of the entire empire on his shoulders alone. But eventually, even he burned out. I remained quiet. The original novel had only dedicated a few brief sentences to the downfall of the Vance family after the antagonist's early death. But to Madeline, those few lines had been an entire lifetime of agonizing reality. She turned back to face me, her eyes brimming with unshed tears. "This time, when I opened my eyes, it was right before your overdose. I thought I was too late to save you. But thank God, you woke up." I carefully set my glass down on the table. "You're right. I am not the Chloe you used to know." Madeline didn't look surprised. "But I am going to live this life as her," I said, my voice steady and firm. "I will never love Christian Vance. I will never hurt Julian. And I will absolutely not allow outsiders to tear this family apart." Madeline's eyes turned a gentle shade of red. "What do you want out of this?" I looked her in the eye. My answer absolute. I want to live a good life, build a real future with my husband, and help you clean up the rot in this household. Madeline stared at me for a long moment before a genuine, radiant smile broke across her face, the cold, tense armor she wore completely melting away. "All right, from this moment on, I am entirely in your corner." I immediately flashed her a bright, sweet smile. "Thanks." "Mom," Madeline let out a soft laugh, shaking her head. "You certainly have a quick wit." "Don't you just then?" The head butler knocked softly and stepped into the room. "Ma'am, Mr. Vance has just returned. He is currently in the main living room with Christian, who claims he has an urgent family matter to discuss." Madeline wiped the corners of her eyes, her warm demeanor vanishing instantly as she stood up, reassuming the sharp, aristocratic poise of the Vance matriarch. I stood up right along with her, draping Julian's suit jacket over my shoulders with a smirk. "Can you walk?" she asked, looking at me. "Absolutely," I replied. "This is the first real act since my return. There's no way I'm missing it." Madeline offered me her arm, and together, we walked out of the private room. The moment we approached the main living area, Christian's loud, demanding voice echoed through the high-ceilinged space. "Dad, you can't let Julian take total control over the new downtown commercial development project. That account should have been handed to me." Madeline and I exchanged a knowing look. Perfect. The spoiled golden child had barely recovered from a slap before jumping straight onto the chopping block. Madeline curled her lips into a cold smile. "Well, Chloe, where do you think we should start teaching him his lesson?" I squeezed her arm gently, smiling like an absolute angel. "Let's start by teaching him that the Vance family doesn't subsidize dead weight." The main living room of the Vance estate was massive, designed with towering ceilings that made every conversation echo. Charles Vance sat squarely in the center of the main leather sofa, his designer suit pristine, his graying hair perfectly slicked back, the absolute picture of a dignified corporate billionaire. If I didn't know the plot of the novel, I might have been fooled by his distinguished appearance. Unfortunately, I knew better. This man had built his empire using his wife's family connections and fortune, relying entirely on Madeline's brilliant business acumen to secure his wealth. Yet, later in life, he would turn around and abandon her for a soft, submissive woman named Evelyn, claiming his wife was too controlling and stripped him of his dignity. In these types of melodramas, men like him always suffered from the same pathetic disease they ate from the plate their wives provided. Smash the plate. And then complained the porcelain wasn't soft enough. Christian stood right next to his father, his face twisted in a petulant pout. The red mark from my slap hadn't faded yet, making him look utterly ridiculous. When Charles saw Madeline and me enter the room, his eyebrows immediately knit together in disapproval. "Chloe, you just woke up from a medical emergency. What are you doing out of bed? You should be resting." His tone sounded parental, but his eyes held absolutely zero warmth or concern. I kept my hand resting on Madeline's arm, maintaining a thoroughly sweet and innocent voice. "You're entirely right. Dad, I should be resting, but I happened to hear Christian shouting about the downtown development project, and I was terrified that my sudden health scare was causing family friction. So I wanted to see if I could help." Christian let out a harsh, scoffing laugh. "What do you know about commercial real estate? Chloe, don't think that just because Mom took your side in the viewing room, you suddenly have a say in corporate affairs." I stared at him. Sister-in-law, Christian. His face darkened instantly. Charles waved his hand dismissively, his patience wearing thin. "All right. Enough. Let's not make a mountain out of a molehill regarding titles. Christian is young, and he speaks impulsively. As his sister-in-law, you should show some maturity and let it slide." Madeline let out a sharp, humorless laugh. "He's been 25 for a while now." "Charles, exactly when is he going to grow up? Are we waiting until he completely bankrupts a branch of the firm before we stop calling him young?" Charles choked on his words, completely blindsided. Christian quickly tried to defend himself. "Mom, I'm not going to bankrupt anything. The downtown development project is my chance to finally prove my capabilities. Julian already controls nearly every major sector of the firm. Now he's seizing this project too. Don't you think that's entirely unfair to me?" I almost wanted to applaud his sheer audacity. A man who spent his entire existence purchasing sports cars, drinking at high-end clubs, and flirting with the domestic staff was standing here, talking about proving his capabilities. His confidence truly required zero capital. Madeline took a seat on the sofa, and I gracefully sat down right beside her. She looked up at her youngest son. "You want to prove your capabilities? Fine. Tell me, which major construction firms are currently bidding against us for the downtown project?" Christian froze, his mouth opening slightly. Madeline pressed on, her voice calm but unrelenting. "What is our projected cash flow for the first 2 quarters? What is the estimated return on investment over a 3-year period? And what are the primary risks associated with the new zoning laws and supply chain disruptions?" The living room descended into absolute silence. Christian opened and closed his mouth several times, before finally stammering out, The project analysis team handles all of those details." I tilted my head, offering a look of pure innocence. "Then what exactly would your job be?" Christian. Cutting the ribbon at the opening ceremony, Christian's face went through a spectacular transition from pale white to bright red. Charles cleared his throat loudly, trying to salvage his favorite son's dignity. Everyone has to start somewhere. Madeline? Even Julian wasn't born knowing how to manage a multi-billion-dollar corporation. I began studying our corporate assets when I was 18. The resonant voice cut through the room from the side entrance. I turned my head. Julian walked into the room from the adjacent study, wearing a crisp white dress shirt and a black tie, holding a sleek tablet in his hand. The sharp geometric lighting of the room caught the defined angles of his jaw, making him look exceptionally striking. This was a true leading man, brilliant, powerful, wealthy, and most importantly, my legal husband. A golden opportunity like him didn't come around twice, and I was going to secure my place by his side. Christian's posture withered slightly the moment his brother appeared. Julian didn't even look at him. He walked straight over to where I was sitting and looked down at me. "The doctor explicitly stated you need to rest." I pulled his suit jacket a little tighter around my shoulders. looking up at him with wide, devoted eyes. I wanted to rest. Julian, but I heard someone was trying to take your project away. And I couldn't help but worry about you. He stared at me for a few quiet seconds, his dark eyes searching mine. You're worried about me. Of course, I said softly. You're my husband. The room went dead silent again. Christian looked like he wanted to physically bore a hole through my skull. While Charles frowned heavily, Madeline simply lifted her teacup. Her face, a picture of pure amusement, as she watched the entertainment unfold. Julian kept his gaze on me, the corners of his lips staying firm, but the coldness in his eyes visibly thawed. No one is taking anything, he said, his voice quiet but carrying an absolute, unshakable authority. I instantly relaxed. That was the beauty of a competent man. He didn't need to yell to command a room, recognizing that the tide had completely turned against them. Charles deepened his voice, adopting a sterner tone. Julian, I am not dismissing your talents, but Christian is your brother. He will eventually have to carry a portion of the Vance legacy. As his older brother, you need to provide him with opportunities. Julian set his tablet down on the glass coffee table, displaying a series of financial spreadsheets. These are the internal performance metrics from the past 3 fiscal years. Christian has been given oversight on 4 minor projects. 2 resulted in net financial losses. 1 required an emergency change of leadership midway through due to gross mismanagement, and the last exceeded its budget 3 times over before construction even broke ground. Christian's expression morphed into pure panic. You've been spying on me. Julian directed a cool, indifferent gaze toward him. Corporate data requires no spying. It is a matter of basic accounting. I bit the inside of my cheek to keep from laughing out loud. The corporate takedown was beautiful. Charles picked up the tablet, his face growing darker with every line he read. Madeline set her teacup down with a final, decisive click. Now, is there anyone else who believes Christian should be handed the downtown development project? Charles remained completely silent. Christian, entirely unwilling to concede defeat, raised his voice. I just lack experience. If you never give me a real shot at a major account, how am I ever supposed to improve? I had been waiting for exactly that line. Then let's give him a shot, I chimed in smoothly. Every eye in the room instantly snapped to me. I sat up straight, offering the most helpful, supportive smile I could muster. A major commercial development project is far too risky to use as a training exercise. But if Christian is genuinely serious about learning the business, he should start at the foundational level of the firm. For instance, an entry-level administrative assistant, an assistant project coordinator, or even working in the mailroom. Once he masters the smaller responsibilities, he'll finally have the qualifications to handle the multi-million-dollar accounts. Christian glared at me with pure hatred. You expect me to fetch coffee and file paperwork? I thought you wanted to learn. I countered gently. A person who truly wants to learn doesn't look down on the fundamentals. I turned my eyes toward Julian, letting my voice soften. Don't you agree? Sweetheart, Julian didn't hesitate for a single second. I agree. Hearing that one word felt like floating on air. Having a powerful, wealthy husband back you up was an incredible feeling. Madeline nodded firmly. Then, it's settled. Starting next Monday, Christian will report to the corporate headquarters as an entry-level administrative assistant. His corporate expense accounts and monthly allowance are suspended indefinitely. He will live entirely on his earned wages. Christian bolted upright from the sofa, utterly frantic. Mom, have you completely lost your mind? I am a Vance. Madeline's face turned into an absolute sheet of ice. Which is precisely why you need to understand that the wealth of this family does not fall from the sky. Charles frowned deeply. Madeline, don't you think this is a bit excessive? Excessive! Madeline turned her sharp gaze onto her husband, a 25-year-old man who cannot analyze a financial sheet, has 0 earning capacity, shows utter disrespect to his sister-in-law, and demands corporate power solely based on his last name. Placing him in an entry-level position is the highest courtesy I could possibly afford him. Charles was completely silenced. Christian's eyes turned entirely red with a mix of humiliation and fury. Fine, you're all ganging up on me. Especially you. Chloe Madeline's eyes flashed dangerously. Christian clamped his jaw shut, forcing out the correction through gritted teeth. Sister-in-law, I offered him a radiant smile. I'm glad to see you're capable of learning. Christian turned on his heel and stormed out of the room. As he passed the doorway, he kicked a solid mahogany side table in a fit of rage. He clearly stubbed his toe badly, his face contorting in agony. But he forced himself to keep walking, to preserve what little dignity he had left. I lowered my head, taking another sip of water while trembling from the sheer effort of suppressing my laughter. Charles stood up as well, his expression deeply displeased. You've turned a simple family gathering into an absolute disaster. Madeline, you seriously need to reflect on your actions. Madeline replied without a single hint of warmth. And you, too, Charles, should reflect on exactly whose fortune and family connections have kept the Vance name relevant all these years. Charles froze, his jaw tightening before he threw his hands up and walked out of the living room. With the primary source of conflict gone, the heavy atmosphere finally began to lift. I was just about to let out a breath of relief when Julian leaned down. His dark eyes locked onto mine. You call me sweetheart remarkably naturally now. I nearly choked on my water. Madeline immediately stood up from her chair. I am going to check on the kitchen to see if your soup is ready. She walked away so quickly it was hard to believe she had been casually lounging a second ago. Suddenly, the massive living room felt incredibly small with only Julian and me inside. I clutched my glass, forcing myself to maintain absolute composure. We are legally married. Julian, is it incorrect for me to address my husband affectionately? Julian took a seat right next to me, reducing the distance between us significantly. The faint, clean scent of cedarwood and crisp winter air that radiated from him enveloped my senses. It was cool and sharp, but entirely comforting. You've never called me that before. I stared at the pristine, silver buttons of his dress shirt, my mind racing faster than a supercomputer. I was foolish and misguided in the past, Julian, but I see things clearly now. I raised my head, looking directly into his intense, dark eyes. I finally realized that the most intelligent, dependable, and capable man in this city is my husband. Throwing my life away for anything less was a complete lapse in sanity. Julian remained silent, his gaze unreadable. I felt a sudden pang of nervousness. Did I lay it on too thick? A few agonizing seconds passed before the corners of his lips curved into a tiny, almost imperceptible smile. The sight made my heart skip a beat. Make sure you remember that from now on. I nodded with absolute seriousness. I won't forget. He reached out, gently tucking his suit jacket more securely around my shoulders. Eat your soup when it arrives, and then get some rest. My mother and I will handle the rest of this. No, I said quickly, catching the sleeve of his shirt before he could pull away. I want to help. Julian looked down at my hand, gripping his sleeve, an eyebrow raised. Help how I let out a slow, sharp smile. Christian is just the beginning. Julian, the people causing real harm to this family go much deeper than him. His eyes darkened with immediate understanding. He knew exactly what I meant. Within the Vance dynasty, the next person who needed to be violently removed from their pedestal was Charles Vance, and the manipulative woman waiting in the wings of his life was undoubtedly preparing to make her entrance. A bowl of hot, premium clear soup was placed on the coffee table before me, steam rising gracefully into the air. But before I could pick up the spoon, a loud, crashing sound echoed from the outdoor patio area. The sharp shatter of porcelain was immediately followed by Christian's irritated, arrogant shouting, "Are you completely incompetent? You can't even brew a simple espresso correctly. What exactly does this family pay you for?" The man who had been ordered to report as an entry-level assistant on Monday morning was already taking his frustration out on the household staff by Friday afternoon. The privileged playboy truly never failed to meet my expectations. His capacity for causing mindless drama was remarkably consistent. Madeline sat across from me, calmly using a silk napkin to dab the corner of her lips. Any guesses on who he's terrorizing this time? I took a small spoonful of the hot soup, keeping my voice sweet and steady. Based on the pitch of the response, I'd say it's Harper. Harper was the youngest maid employed at the Vance estate. In the original novel, her character didn't receive much page time, but whenever she did appear, she possessed an uncanny ability to always be in the perfect position. Wherever a wealthy young bachelor was walking, she was there to gracefully trip and fall into his arms. wherever a family argument occurred. She just happened to be walking past with a tray of refreshments. She was the classic gold-digging archetype, entirely self-absorbed, fully convinced that if she just acted sweet and victimized enough, a billionaire heir would look past her uniform and fall in love with her pure, untainted soul. It was supposed to be a romantic trope, but thinking about it in reality just made her look incredibly calculating. Madeline looked at me knowingly. "You know her, I've noticed her around," I replied smoothly. "She seems exceptionally dedicated to looking after Christian." The moment those words left my mouth, Madeline understood completely. A cold, cynical smile touched her lips. "Perfect. Let's make sure she looks after him thoroughly." Outside, Harper's soft, trembling voice carried clearly through the afternoon air. "Christian, I am so incredibly sorry. It was entirely my fault. I'm so clumsy. Please don't be angry. If Mrs. Vance finds out that I upset you, I'm certain she'll terminate my employment." Her tone was so thick with artificial sweetness it could have caused cavities. Madeline and I exchanged a brief look. The opening act had officially begun. Madeline stood up from her chair, and I followed closely behind, keeping Julian's jacket draped over my shoulders. The moment we stepped onto the covered marble veranda, the scene in the courtyard unfolded beautifully before us. Christian stood beside a wrought iron patio table, a few dark drops of espresso staining his expensive designer shirt. Harper stood before him, her lower lip trembling, her eyes wide and watery as she held a white linen cloth. She didn't dare wipe the shirt directly, instead offering the cloth with a delicate, trembling hand that practically screamed for comfort. "Please let me launder the shirt for you." "Christian, espresso stains are impossible to get out if they sit too long." Christian's initial anger seemed to melt away slightly at her soft, helpless display. He sighed, adjusting his cuffs. "Forget about it. Just be more careful next time." Harper raised her eyes, a look of manufactured adoration shining through her tears. You're really not angry with me." It was truly a sight to behold. The man who had been screaming at the top of his lungs about useless employees a second ago had transformed into a benevolent, forgiving gentleman simply because a pretty girl shed a few tears. I slowly began to clap, the sound echoing sharply against the stone tiles of the patio. The sudden noise caused both of them to snap their heads in our direction. The moment Christian saw me, his expression curdled into pure irritation. "What are you doing out here?" "Chloe." I offered him a bright, cheerful smile. "Oh, I just came out to watch you practice your very first lesson in corporate human resources. You're doing a wonderful job demonstrating respect for the workforce." "Christian." Harper immediately lowered her head, curtsying nervously. "Mrs. Vance." She addressed me flawlessly, but her fingers tightened with intense frustration around the linen cloth Christian had barely brushed against. I knew that look all too well. In her mind, she was utterly cursing my existence for ruining what was supposed to be her cinematic, romantic encounter with the billionaire heir. Madeline stepped forward, her sharp eyes scanning the shattered pieces of porcelain littering the manicured lawn. "Who is responsible for this mess?" Harper immediately stepped forward, placing herself slightly in front of Christian. "Ma'am, it was entirely my error. I was careless and spilled the espresso onto Christian's shirt. He was kind enough to overlook my mistake, but I feel absolutely terrible about the accident." Every single sentence was carefully designed to take the blame while simultaneously highlighting how Christian had protected her. I almost wanted to hand her a microphone so she could continue her performance. Predictably, Christian took the bait completely. "Mom, it's just a coffee cup. There's absolutely no need to turn this into an interrogation." Madeline fixed a cool, unyielding gaze on her son. "The porcelain is entirely irrelevant." "Christian, but you were just screaming at a member of my staff loud enough for the entire estate to hear. Do I need to repeat your exact words back to you?" Christian's jaw tightened. "I was just frustrated. And being frustrated gives you the right to degrade the people who maintain this home," I chimed in softly, my voice dripping with sweet concern. "I suppose Christian is simply too accustomed to being served, and hasn't quite learned how to take accountability for his own emotional outbursts." Christian whirled around, his eyes flashing with rage. "Listen to me. Sister-in-law,